I'm joined today by Charles Campbell, longtime basketball scout in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and currently he is helping the world by making Escalades, a beautiful car
Man,
where there was one. And so, Charles, I'm curious to know what your experiences have been like on the topic of either unconstitutional nonviolent police harassment or unconstitutional non-lethal police brutality.
yeah, when you first posed that question to me, it took me back to an experience. I was probably 15, 15 years old, and went to high school for a year and a half in Mesquite High here in Dallas, Mesquite, Texas. And we were at a house party, a bunch of kids at a house party, no problems, no drama, nothing. And it's probably late, maybe. I mean, if I'm 15, late is 11:30, because I think in Mesquite we had a curfew of midnight at the time. And so if you were under 18, so we're leaving the party. I have a vehicle. I get in the car. I have three of my friends with me. And so we leave normal. There's no issues, nothing. As we're going down the street, we just see blue and red everywhere. It was probably three, four police cars. Um, so that's pretty odd because one, there was no fighting, there was no alcohol, there was no drug use. It was just a bunch of high school kids hanging out at a party at a house, which was perfectly normal, during those days in your high school years. So as I turned the corner, a police officer blocks my car. He blocks my car off in the front, and then another one blocks my car in the back. So luckily, I had a mom who dealt with civil rights, grew up in D.C., and so she had really educated me on, just in those situations to stay calm. How do you handle yourself? And so, you know, I remember just kind of looking in my rear view, the lights are shining on us. And one of the guys in the car with me, he was a little nervous. He was a little nervous. We didn't have anything in the car, no weapons, no drugs. We were sober. Nothing. I mean, we're just four kids. I'm taking my friends home and then I'm going home. I'm pretty sure I had basketball practice the next day or something like that. And as I look in the rear view, I see the cop walking up to my car with his gun out. He already has his gun out. And so immediately terror went through my body. Like immediately I felt fear that I pretty much hadn't felt before. And he approaches the vehicle, tells everyone to get out the car. We oblige, we get out the car. His partner comes around, shines a light in the vehicle, and uh, we all get out. And as I turn around, he has his pistol pointed square in my face. I'm looking down the barrel of a pistol. I didn't grow up in a house with guns. I don't have family members that hunt or anything of the sort. So this was my first experience with a gun. Um, and I was terrified. And the guy starts to freak out who's with me. He's like, man, what are we, why are you pulling guns on us? What are we doing? What are you doing? And he gave us no explanation. So me and my friend are like, hey man, calm down. Like, calm down, be quiet, just listen to whatever it is they have to say. So they sat us on the curb, searched my vehicle again. Um, and I'm just sitting there thinking, why are we here? So my friend, who's another friend that's in the car, he's like, hey, why you guys have us detained? And we never got an answer. And for me, it just felt like I was in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. The party was definitely a party, blacks, whites, Hispanics. We were all together in a predominantly white neighborhood in Mesquite. And at the time that I was in Mesquite, I know the demographics have changed some now, but at the time that I went to Mesquite High School, uh, I remember it was a predominantly white school. When I moved to Texas, to the Mesquite area, my mom moved here we were living in Maryland. Uh, I was one of five black kids in my entire third grade. So I come from Prince George's County, Maryland, which is predominantly black, to this experience. So it is so much of a culture shock. But here I am now, fast forward 15 years old, and I just feel like I'm in the wrong neighborhood. Um, and my skin color isn't what it needs to be, And I don't know if that was their actual thought process, because again, I never got an explanation. I never got an apology, nothing. And there was no, oh, you fit the profile, we're looking for this vehicle. None of that. It was just like, to me, a total abuse of power. And that was my first real experience with police. And it stuck with me. And it's something that kind of contributes to, my mindset as far as, dealing with police officers. So
Well, I want the record to reflect that I've been at house parties in high school that were white house parties
Yeah,
where we were drinking and doing drugs and sometimes fighting. And
yeah,
the cops showed up and they never pulled their gun out.
yeah. See, that's
Now, we're
crazy.
actually committing criminal acts,
Right.
and never one time did the cops view us as a threat. I've never seen the barrel of a police officer's gun, certainly not at 15 fucking years old.
Yeah, yeah.
It sucks that you had that experience. And so my follow-up question is, if you're, one, to me, even though he didn't take a club to your head, I consider pointing a gun in a 15-year-old boy's face to be an act of violence and an act of terrorism. I want to make that very clear.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, of your closest circle of black friends, ballpark figure, what percent of them have had some similar story? Maybe not that bad of literally looking at a gun, but being pulled over for without just cause, unconstitutionally,
Yeah.
walking on the sidewalk with a group of friends, going to the corner store to get orange juice for one of your parents, and they roll up and ask for ID, just being treated unnecessarily with hostility or suspicion. Ballpark, what percent of your closest circle of black friends have had some experience like that or worse?
You know, um, I'm very careful about over sensationalizing things because we are in that culture where we're doing that right now. But I legitimately probably could say more than 60% of them. It's to the point that, and just another quick story, and it just came to my mind. We couldn't even walk in Townies Mall in Mesquite in groups of more than 3 people. So I can't even go to the mall with my friends. I played on the basketball team. The basketball team hangs out together. I can't even walk around the mall with my high school Letterman jacket on, as a basketball player in my city with my friends. The police would harass us, break us up, and it's fighting. People are fighting. I don't know of one fight at that time that happened inside of Townies Mall. Not one. No one has ever been at that point in time. I know there's been incidents since, but at that point in time, there were no issues, and we couldn't even walk more than three guys going shoe shopping, messing around, chasing girls, just posted up at the food court. They would break us up and harass us. And I know, again, I'm 35 years old. I still, when I ride by a police officer in my car, I'm looking in the rearview mirror at 35, and I don't have a criminal record. I've never been in any major trouble. It's just unbelievable. But I can tell you, it's probably more than 60%. And they tell me the same thing when police, when I ride by a cop, even if I'm with my wife and my kids, if I'm by myself, if I'm this and that, I look in my rear view to see, if I'm going to be stopped, harassed, or just mess with, just followed for a little bit and then tailed off on, because that happens a lot too.
You bring up a really important point, and uh, we talk a lot about police training. And one thing we need to be doing nationally in terms of training is getting cops to accept that black people are nervous around cops because cops have guns, and black people have been terrorized by police institutions for 400 years. And so being nervous based on fear isn't something that should arouse suspicion. It would
No,
be abnormal for a black person not to feel some level of fear when they get pulled over. And they really need to get that, because the cops see a nervous black man. Oh, he's nervous because he's done something wrong.
right.
No, he's nervous because he's afraid you're going to fucking kill him,
Yeah.
or pull
Yeah.
him out of the car, or drop a bag of drugs that he didn't have on him to set him up. And these are things that, one of the reasons I'm doing these, Charles, is that we need white people to understand that the culture in policing that permits the nonviolent, unconstitutional police harassment, you have to address that.
Yeah.
The nonviolent harassment is connected to the violence and the murder, without a doubt. And so my follow-up questions, so you say 60%, and I
I
don't
would
want
say
to
60 plus, I would say for sure.
I don't want to overread, based on your facial expressions and what your eyes were saying. But let's say it's 60%.
Yeah.
And your goal clearly is to not sensationalize, but I have a feeling that really, as you're running this through your mind, it's quite a bit higher than 60.
I'm sitting there thinking about my friends that I would ask this question to, and they would definitely probably tell me, yeah.
Yeah, you're probably not thinking of even one that would tell you no.
Right. No, I'm not. I'm not.
But let's use 60% because
Yeah.
I agree with you. I'm not. I don't know if you've seen any of these I've done with white coaches who I asked them to talk to their black players,
Yeah.
and I'm not the if they come back and say 55%, I want to hear from them. But
Right.
I'm not only looking for the ones that report 100%.
Right.
Right. So I don't want to sensationalize this or propagandize this either.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask you, and it's quite intuitive. But 60% is a clear majority.
Hmm.
And so, given that it's a clear majority, do you consider this cultural policing problem of uh, not, we say Black Lives Matter, and they do, Black rights matter also. And
Yeah.
Black rights are connected to Black lives. And Black rights are being really systematically ignored and abused by the police from hundreds of conversations I've had. And so, in your opinion, is this issue, would you call this issue isolated, as so many white people insist? So many white people say, oh, it's just a few bad apples, this is isolated. Do you agree with the assessment that this issue is isolated, or do you think it's more pervasive?
Every cop that I've experienced in terms of a speeding ticket, or just any type of traffic stop, and it may be some of my own fear from my experience when I was 15, obviously, but I have felt like um, every single time there was just a level of suspicion. And like you said, because I was uncomfortable, I was nervous. He doesn't know, obviously, that I had an experience with a police officer when I was 15 that I had. But, my uncomfortability, my sweaty palms, or, I'm fidgety, it is always some type of suspicion that I've felt like, wow, I, I'm not the criminal. I'm not a criminal at all. Maybe I just sped a little bit, but what's up with the suspicion, unnecessarily shining flashlights in your eyes, asking you the same question multiple times to see if you're going to, answer differently, looking at your driver's license, asking is this still your address? Do you still live here? I live in Texas. I have a Texas address. I mean, just different kind of questions that I feel like my counterparts, my friends in the white community, they just don't deal with it. So it's kind of like, oh, that's hard to believe. I've been in situations where I've seen people that are not black and not Hispanic talk to cops in a way that I would never talk to a cop, like ever. I would never even begin to have even a dialogue other than yes, sir, no, sir, I'm going here, I'm doing that, because it is viewed as insubordination or disrespect when we're not the ones doing anything. We're not harassing anybody. In those situations, if I'm speeding just like everybody else. It doesn't mean that, I have drugs in the car, or, just all types of crazy stuff, that comes up, that when you do see these conversations on social media, or you start to have dialogue, that people just don't believe it happens. And it does. And I did want to speak to the thing you were talking about policing. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a great book that I read last year. And I think it's called Talking to Strangers. And what he does is he breaks down the Sandra Bland situation and identifies just how, and something that you said, Sandra Bland was nervous in the situation and she was upset because of her dealings with police and the dealings of her community with police, to which the officer interpreted as disrespect, insubordination, to the point that he handcuffed the woman for what? Like, for what? A traffic stop? She got handcuffed because she wanted to know why she was stopped, and he viewed that as disrespect. It's a great read. It is an absolute great read, and it speaks to both sides of the coin. Because I don't hate cops. I don't. I mean, I think police are necessary. I do want to live in a safe neighborhood. I do want to live in a neighborhood where I feel like my kids are safe, that I don't have to worry about them. But where we are today, I worry about my sons and my daughters because of the videos I've seen of grown male cops slamming little girls and handcuffing little girls. I worry about my kids, with the police, when I should be comfortable, with them. And it's like, my kids live in a very nice suburban, low crime, predominantly white neighborhood, and I have so much social anxiety because of that very thing, and I shouldn't. I shouldn't.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things. One, on the anxiety, the white people need to muster the empathy because too often at least half of the white grown-ups in my immediate circle of friends have unresolved trauma based on a poor relationship with either their mother or their father.
Right.
Okay. And so, and we're 45, so let's say mid 40s. So if white people are still living with our trauma from a difficult relationship with a parent, it's pretty shitty for us to look at you and say, oh, you had a gun in your face when you were 15, one time, get over it.
Right.
And so it's like, and it speaks to the dehumanization of black people. It's like, we think that our trauma should be valued and recognized, but your trauma should be dismissed, and you just need to suck it up and get over it.
Yeah.
And so that's one point. And then you mentioned the disbelief, and it is, again, it's dehumanization and it's centuries of racism. The analogy I use, I just tweeted about this yesterday, the day before, but the analogy I use is that if you met an astronaut who went to the moon, and you'd never been to the moon, you wouldn't disbelieve everything he was saying.
Right.
The fact that I don't have experiences with police like you've had doesn't mean that you're lying.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
we need to be able to step outside of ourselves and say, like, and I was in the same boat. When I fell in love with hoops in 88, but I was at a majority white private school.
Okay.
Now, I was hooping at a gym that was mostly black, high school kids when I was in 6th, 7th grade. But these were very superficial relationships, right? Like, you don't really develop a close friendship based on kids you see playing pickup once a week or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But then I transferred to Lamar, which is has a diverse student population. And I started to have, and there was one black girl at St. John's that was my friend.
Yeah.
One, right? And really hard it's like, you talk about the whitewashing of juries. I'm getting off topic a bit, but if a jury has 3 or more black people with a black defendant, the conviction rate's 92%. If a jury has 1 or fewer black people on it, the conviction rate for black defendants over 99%. And that's that gap, right, of railroading. It's not, there's this idea, very racist idea, that black people will never hold each other accountable.
Right.
Well, if that's true, why is the conviction rate 92%? The idea that you guys want, like, armed, dangerous people of any race on the streets is absurd. Nobody marches when a black bank robber gets shot and killed in a shootout with police, right? But the insistence on reflexive disbelief needs to stop. And when I got to Lamar, like, my book's called Recovering Racist. I don't say recovered racist. I still think, I still know I am a racist. I've just gotten myself down on the 10-point scale to like the 1.5 or 2.
Right.
And so when I have a reflexive racist thought, I check myself and often yell at myself. Like, why the fuck do you still, like, why would that thought still pop up into your fucking brain?
Yeah.
Well, because of brainwashing from the first 12 years of life.
Well, I was going to say that Steve Kerr made a great point when he was talking about, we need to change the way that we teach black culture and black history in school. That's where it starts.
Yeah, that's important too. And so the first 5, 6, 7 conversations I had with my first group of black friends at Lamar, and they're telling me these stories, and I'm like, come on, you must have rolled a stop sign, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Man, that can't be, like, man, I've been pulled over, and that just doesn't, you weren't doing 37 and 35? You weren't there? And they're like, no, Pete, we were not doing 37 and 35. We were doing 32 and a 35 because we're scared shitless to get pulled over.
Man.
Like, the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th black friend who told me very similar theme stories. It was like major eye-opening moment for me. And I was like, holy shit. Like that was the first 30 years ago. It was the first time I had my eyes opened to how incredibly differently you guys are treated in policing than white people are. So,
You know, our community does not hate the police. I think when you hear songs "fuck the police" and you see such a anger toward the police, that is the culmination of years of mistrust. Like you said, we want to live in safe neighborhoods. We want to have safe schools. We don't want our kids going to schools and worried about drugs, guns, violence, and or any of that. And I say that because I have been lectured when I have spoken out about, police brutality and the unfair treatment of the judicial system. I have been lectured and told, well, attempted to be lectured and told that we need to address our issues within our own community.
No,
As if, right, right. And it's like, you think we don't want to live in safe communities and, but we have a complete and total mistrust of police, the people that are designed to protect us. And that mistrust, like you said, has been hundreds of years. It's not just the last 50 years. That's not what we're talking about. It's not just George and Trayvon. Like, we are talking about hundreds of years of fathers, mothers, daughters, uncles, brothers, sisters being mistreated, killed, abused, unfairly represent. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But I don't know a black person that hates a cop. Like, I don't know it. I don't know one. I don't have a friend. And I have friends on all different ends of the spectrum. You know, shady to law-abiding citizen. And they don't hate police. It's mistrust. We do not trust the police at all.
Yeah, and I just think it's so important because like we talked about earlier with the trauma, it's like the white people can hear that and say, well, you see, it's based on feelings, not reality. And so
Right.
I just, again, want to say to any white people who might watch this, everything black people feel about the police is rational. It would be irrational for black people to feel any other way toward the police. The problem is not black feelings. The problem is police behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I really need you white people to get that through your brains. If every black person has, and a lot of the white people who are against racial justice, then they don't think that, they don't know that, but they are.
Right.
You know, if you, especially in this time, if you're not for it, you're against it. They wrap themselves in the Constitution, a lot of that crowd. And if a person's not speeding and their tag isn't out, and they don't have a warrant out with the plate gets ran, and the cops pull them over, that is either a First Amendment violation, a Fourth Amendment violation, or both. In many cases, both, because they'll include in there, well, he had a Wu-Tang Clan bumper sticker, and Wu-Tang kind of promotes the weed culture or whatever, right? Well, that's a First Amendment violation. You're not allowed to be judged by the government for your freedom of expression.
Right.
And then, of course, you have Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable stops, searches, seizures. It's right there in black and white in the Constitution. And so for all of you white people that look at this and say, well, he got pulled over a handful of times when he maybe hadn't done anything. I don't really believe that, but maybe he hadn't done anything. Let's just keep in mind that if you love the Constitution, then you should believe the rights apply to every American, not just Americans who look like you. Otherwise, if you intend to selectively apply the Constitution, then you hate the Constitution.
Right.
And as an American, to hate the Constitution is pretty shitty. So either demand it be applied equally or fess up that you hate the document that you wrap yourselves in extremely phonily and borderline constantly. Right. So, well, Charles, anything else to add?
Well, I would love to, if we have just a few minutes, you being a former college coach, and you saying recovering racist. You know, how do you view the climate of today? Specifically, I saw where Ole Miss recently just got their highest recruit in the history of the school, 5-star kid in the history of the school. But last year, the coach came out and wasn't even asked a question about the flag or kneeling. Came out and said, "We're going to, our team's going to kneel. We're going to respect the flag." One of the first things he said at media day, and two, there were protests on the campus of Ole Miss. You know, as a former college coach, and when I say protests, not Black Lives Matter protests, but I think it was it the was it the KKK? I don't know if it was the KKK, but it was definitely.
You're talking about the neo-Nazi Unite the Right?
I think it was, yeah, I think so. I think it was neo-Nazi. Definitely hate on your campus. I mean, how do you deal with that, as a coach? How do you successfully, like, what would you tell your players? I mean, or kids that you're recruiting to come? How do you reconcile them coming to your school when you have some of this stuff going on?
Well, Kermit Davis put Ronnie Hamilton and Win Case in a fucking impossible situation.
Right.
By running his mouth about really, you're more concerned about a flag than you are a human fucking life.
Right.
And I'm sure I've not spoken with either one of them. And I don't really know Win. We've met a couple times.
Yeah.
But I have not spoken with Ronnie about it, but my heart went out to him, just like, oh fuck. Now you still have a job to do if you're Ronnie Hamilton.
Right.
So your job is to help Ole Miss basketball win games. And if you don't, either you're going to get fired or your boss is going to get fired, which means you both get fired.
Right.
And so, as an assistant coach, regardless of race, what a bad position to be put in by your head coach. Because you're supposed to be loyal to your head coach. Right? But you're also supposed to be, as an assistant coach, always have an ear to listen.
Right.
You're kind of oftentimes like a mediator. Like kids come in with complaints. Every time I make 2 shots in a row, coach pulls me out.
Right.
Well, that's just because he wants to save you for late in the game. He needs you to be fresh for late in the game. So don't be soft here and convince yourself you're no longer hot. Why can't you still go back out there and make shots? He knows what he's doing, Da, da, da. And I might be thinking to myself, yeah, I thought it was dumb as shit to take you out too. but
there you go. There's some truth.
But you can't say that. And
right.
So, what a disastrous nightmare situation Kermit put his staff in.
Yeah.
And shame on him for valuing a piece of cloth over human lives. That's just, there's no excuse for it. It's despicable, especially if you're a white guy in basketball.
Yeah.
How many black people do you have to get to know before you recognize the full humanity and demand full citizenship for black people?
Right.
And as far as UVA's it's not like that was a UVA sanctioned event.
Right.
It's not like the University of Virginia was like,
right,
we want neo-Nazis to come and march and we love them.
Right.
It just happens to be that Virginia's a public university. And so people can get permits to do rallies and protests on that campus. Yeah. And Tony Bennett and the university board really can't do a fucking thing about it. So, in that situation, that's what I would say. If that came up in recruiting, I would say, look, this isn't there's literally nothing Tony Bennett can do about it other than speak up, which he did.
Yeah.
And he's got it's public land. They applied for a permit. We have the First Amendment, And I tell you what's the other thing that's interesting on this topic is white privilege allows white people to think they can get away with whatever they want to.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me, the number of white assistant coaches who are liking tweets by, they're tattling on themselves in a major way.
Right.
They're not retweeting for the most part. They're not that stupid, but I get maybe they don't know their likes are public. I don't know.
Right.
But the kind of collectively with this current environment and with people with recruits and their families and their people doing more research. The one thing I can tell you is that as recently as like 3 months ago, it was very uncommon for a black family to ask a white head coach, how do you feel if my son takes a knee during the national anthem?
Yeah.
That question's a lot more common now. And it's putting the, and again, my speculation is every single white basketball coach is a racist. Because if you're not a 0 on the 1 to 10 scale, then you're a racist.
Right.
So like, I'm not saying every single basketball coach is Hitler or Bull Connor, but one of the problems we have is what I call self-issued comparative clemency. That's where I say, I'm not a racist. Bull Connor's a racist.
Right.
Well, that's like a fat ass looking at a bigger fat ass and being like, I'm not a fat ass. Look how fat that fucking guy is.
Right, right.
And so self-issued comparative clemency, it's a broader principle, but it's really applicable here, and it's very important to understand that just because other people are more racist than you doesn't mean you're not a racist.
Yeah.
You know? And if you suffer everyone has bias, okay? And not just racial bias, all kinds of bias, you know. But if you suffer from even a minute amount of bias that is race-related, then you are a racist.
Yeah.
And we as white people, it's incumbent upon us to admit it. Because if we can't admit it, we can't fix it.
Can't fix it, yeah.
And everybody's like, well, as a white person, if you admit you're a racist, the PC police or whatever, they're going to ruin your life. I'm like, it's bullshit. I've publicly admitted that I'm a racist like hundreds of times on camera. And nobody's coming to ruin my life.
Right.
You know, so yeah, you can admit it as long as you're actively working against it. Right? You're not evil to have been brainwashed. Right? I didn't choose to be a fucking racist.
Right.
I've tried really hard to unchoose it with a lot of success, but not total success.
Yeah.
You know, and
and that honesty is appreciated, by the way. I just want to say, you know, hearing you say that is just, it's refreshing, because we're not trying to drill anything in anyone's head. But I mean, you go to AA or any type of meeting, 12-step meeting or program, the first step is to realize you have a problem. That's question. That's the first step. And I think that's one of my personal frustrations is when I am speaking to white people, you won't admit that you have a problem. You admitting you have a problem doesn't make me hate you or want to do something to you. But let's look at this and call it what it is. It's a problem, you know? And like you said, if you're not a 0, if you're a 1, you're still a racist. So,
yes.
I mean.
Yes. And we really do need like a recovering racist 12-step program.
Yeah.
But the first step is, you know, hi, I'm Peter. I'm a racist.
Exactly. And
everybody says, hi, Peter. And then we go from there.
Yeah.
And it's, I've said this before, like, again, it's not evil to have been brainwashed. Right?
We're all brainwashed in some capacity.
I did not ask to be brainwashed into being a racist.
Right.
What makes you evil, or if not evil, certainly not good, is if you refuse to fight against it.
Yeah.
If you're not arguing with yourself, pushing back on yourself, having uncomfortable conversations. I mean, I've had one of my best friends, who's a football player at Trinity. I went to Trinity to play basketball, but didn't make the team for a variety of reasons. But he became my best friend at Trinity. A lot of good friends there, but he's probably my best friend there. You know, we've had bourbon-fueled conversations. He's helped me evolve so much because there's like a list of things that racist white people fall back to.
Right.
If a black person says it's not fair, well, what are the solutions? What are the solutions? It's like, well, whoa, you know, calm down, cowboy. Let's first talk about the issue that was raised. Let's first acknowledge that. You're just trying to brush that aside to be like, oh, you're just complaining. You don't want to be productive. And you're shutting down that very important conversation. And I've been there. I'm just lucky that one of my best friends on earth is patient and is an educator and a sociologist at heart.
Yeah.
And so you know, he can pull up a YouTube video of like, of David Duke saying the same thing. Well, what are the solutions? And I'm like,
Right.
ugh, like, ugh, like,
Yeah.
fuck,
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
and that's the key. You're not a bad-hearted person for having been brainwashed. You're a bad-hearted person, or at least not a good-hearted person, for refusing to fight back against it,
Right.
to try to make yourself better. Because
Exactly.
we have to, just like alcoholism, it's not really a curable disease. You have to manage it daily.
You manage it, and you might have to manage it for the rest of your life.
You might have to manage for the rest of your life. And I hope that uh, I've been considered an ally on this topic for a long time. My nickname in my white fraternity was not intended to be a flattering nickname.
Hmm.
I took it as such. I was
Yeah.
flattered, but it was a racist, like the you
Yeah.
should go join a black fraternity type of, like, what are you even doing here type of thing.
Wow.
And so I've been at this for a while, but and so I probably have a racist thought pop into my head a couple times a week.
Wow.
And whether it's uh, like hell, when Kaepernick first took a knee, I had a quick but then 15 seconds later, I was like, shut the fuck up.
Right.
Like this has nothing to do, like, I didn't need to be corrected. I self-corrected.
Yeah.
But the little reflexive boom just couldn't, here it comes. Well, you got to recognize that shit if you're white and push back against it. Because, like, for example, my grandpa was a Marine Corps colonel, and I was like 8 or 9 years old, Memorial Day service, and I'm fucking around during the Stars and Stripes. And he knocked me in the middle of next week. Explained to me, like, how many people he saw die fighting to protect this nation, and well, shit, that's a life lesson that kind of sticks with you.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but when Cap took a knee, so in the 90s when Mahmoud Abdul Rauf sat during the anthem,
When he said, yes, exactly.
I wasn't angry at him. I also wasn't supportive of him, if my memory serves. Quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
With Cap, I was supportive after the first 8-second, grandfather smack in the back of the head.
Yeah.
Flag matters, boot. And a lot of us had that. It's like, I can empathize with Drew Brees talking about how his 2 World War II veteran grandfathers drilled into his brain the flag is something to be respected. What pisses me off is that as long as he's been around, he was never able to think critically a little bit deeper on the topic.
Right.
I don't blame him for having a reflexive reaction, lest I blame myself. I blame him for not having the wherewithal and the empathy to push back against that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I just, we allow the media to carry so much. And like I said, that Kaepernick stuff was never even about the flag. Like, it wasn't a disrespect to the flag. It was just a recognition. And players, like you said, players have done those type of things throughout. I mean, so many players have. But empathy is definitely needed. And both sides need empathy. Right now, the community that I love, the community that I come from is rightfully angry. And there's a reason, we just get tired of it. We absolutely get tired of it. And I just think social media has carried some of the flames, and you have bad people within everything. Like I said, I don't wish death upon anyone, because to take out a cop is to take a father and a husband from a home. That's an experience that I don't want for anyone. But we do have a major, major, major issue. And is there a solution? I mean, you're doing a great job, but I kind of feel like our community feels like, is there really an end to it? Is there? I mean, yeah, we're marching. Yeah, we're very, very active, but we just did this in the 60s. Like, we've been doing this for so long, and I hope there is real, true progress made. But it's kind of scary. We live in a real scary time, a really scary time.
So the analogy I always use is climbing up Justice Mountain. Okay, we started at the base of Justice Mountain in 1865 when Abraham Lincoln formally ended the evil institution of slavery. Okay. Technically, formally ended in 64, but it didn't matter because the institution existed in states he didn't control.
Right.
It was actually ended on paper in 1865. So that's the base of Justice Mountain. 100 years later, we're marching for the right to vote. Well, if black people can't even vote yet, we didn't make a whole lot of progress in that.
And you said 100 years.
100 years. And
not 10 or 2 or 5.
I feel like we climbed about 10% of the way up Justice Mountain between 1865 and 1965. I feel like between 1965 and today, we've climbed another 20%. So in 50 years, so twice as far in half the time. If you assume the same rate, that means we're going to climb 40% in the next quarter century, which means that when I'm 70 years old, we're going to be about 70% up the way of Justice Mountain if my mathematical assumptions and trends hold true, which is depressing as fuck to know that and of course, if you know anything about mountain climbing, the last 30% is not the easy part.
Yeah, that's the hardest part.
And so but in terms of reforms, I wrote a lot about this in my book, but we have to establish national standards of reform where we strip funding if they don't comply.
Right.
And we have to crumble the blue wall of silence. We have to make sure the due process for police officers who are accused is the same as the citizenry.
Right.
We have to make sure that either it's illegal for a cop to lie to us or it's not illegal for us to lie to a cop. Right? We can't have a double standard in justice where, if anything, police should be held to a higher standard, and yet they're often held to no standard at all.
Right.
In Houston, this will horrify if you don't know. And I started a petition that's not picking up much traction yet, but I'm going to keep retweeting it. Yeah. If a police officer gets accused of misconduct, the 12-person review board is 6 people handpicked by the union and 6 people handpicked by the police chief. So this is like if I got arrested for a crime and my father picked half the jury, my uncle picked the other half.
Right.
Well, who in their right mind could possibly call that reasonable and fair due process?
Exactly.
And in Atlanta, they have a citizen review board, but it's just a recommendation. The police chief gets to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've got, and this is going to be complicated, but the Camden model, the Minneapolis model, the way to kill the union is to shut down and repurpose the police department. So like in Camden, have you read the Camden story?
No, I'm gonna go out and read it as soon as we get off of here.
They had such a problem with police misconduct toward black people, and the union was not letting them fire any of the blatantly racist, violent scumbag cops.
Wow.
And so the clever mayor of Camden reached out to the county people, said, we got this problem, we're going to disband the police, and then I want you to interview them, I want you to run our police. So the Camden Police Department was, boom, no more. That instantly invalidated the union contract and totally neutered the evil union boss in Camden.
Wow.
Like the boss, the union boss in Minneapolis is an evil person.
Yeah.
I might not call the Houston union boss evil, but he's damn sure not good.
Right.
And so if there is no entity, now where Camden went wrong, in my opinion, is they partnered with the county, which meant it was still a government program. And it's really complicated for a government to fire someone for speaking in a way that they don't like.
Right.
Because of the First Amendment. And so like, for example, Susan Cooper, the racist white Karen in Central Park.
Yeah.
Was Well, Franklin Templeton fired her ass immediately.
Hmm.
If she'd worked for the city of New York, would have been a lot more complicated.
It would have been more difficult, yeah.
And so, what I would like to see happen is, in my wild, wet fantasy on this topic, is every police department in the entire nation gets shut down, and a new entity, a nonprofit entity under the watchful eye of the ACLU gets established. And now the city has a contract with the ACLU. The ACLU runs policing. And the ACLU is not going to rehire dudes that have 17, 18 complaints.
Right.
You know, we got to make it easier to complain. You have to go in person. That's pretty intimidating.
It's very intimidating to walk into a police station.
We should be requiring the police to carry liability insurance like nurses and doctors have to.
Right.
Insurance companies are a lot better at assessing risk than a public sector bureaucracy will ever be.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're not speaking up against the bad cops, you're a bad cop too. I believe silence is complicity. And so I don't really see very many good cops. I want to, but I just don't see very many of them, based on the standard of it's a prerequisite to consider yourself a good cop speaking up against the bad cops.
Right.
If you ain't speaking up against the bad cops, you are not a good cop.
Right.
And I feel very strongly about that. But a lot of the reason why the Asian cop in Minneapolis was terrified of that evil, violent white terrorist who was his superior,
yeah,
who was his senior officer on the scene. I mean, you saw the terror on his face, right? He was afraid of that piece of shit terrorist that murdered George Floyd.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like, we're saying speak up, but he could wind up with a knee on his neck next.
I was going to say
and the union's going to support the more veteran people.
Exactly.
So if we did, it'd be a lot easier to have the insurance company put a price tag on the overtly terrible cops. Mm-hmm. It was untenable that no one would pay that. You know, the piece of shit in Minnesota. I don't like saying his name.
Right.
The terrorist in Minnesota who murdered George Floyd. He had a rap sheet a mile long. Every white race is talking about George Floyd's arrest record. Let's talk about that piece of shit's complaint record.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the insurance company, if they'd been involved and liability insurance were required, that piece of shit would have had to pay like $37,000, $38,000 a month.
Wow.
In insurance. Right. And then, well, that's more than his take-home pay.
Yeah, exactly.
Go find something else to do with your life that doesn't involve a gun and the authority to commit murder. You know, and so I would have a large federal fund in the billions of dollars giving large cash rewards to police officers who informed on other police officers. I would give large cash bonuses to police officers who went a calendar year without a single complaint filed against them. I would give exponentially increasing cash fines to the cops who had repeated complaints in a calendar year. If you partnered with a nonprofit and took it out of the public sector sphere where you sidestep the First Amendment, you know, I'm seeing police officers post angry, rage-filled, blatantly racist shit on Facebook.
Yeah.
And if the ACLU were in charge and it was a nonprofit situation, they could fire that motherfucker immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately. No review board, no union.
Yeah, none of that, yeah.
Just like Susan Cooper got whacked by Franklin Templeton.
Right.
You know, and so I literally wrote like almost 100 pages on the topic of solutions. Mm. So I could go on for a long time. And this, by the way, is unique. This is the first time that that the subject of the interview flipped it and turned me into the subject.
Well, you know, I just reading, you know, knowing you all these years, and we have basketball history. So when you transition into this, I was really intrigued by it because increasingly over the years, it's something that I've become more and more passionate about. I used to be involved with prison ministry, where we would go into prison and we would actually play basketball with inmates. So I would have a group of guys, normally my friends, and we would go into the Coalfield unit is one of the units in Texas. It's the largest maximum security unit in the state, and we would play their all-star team of guys. And I cannot tell you how my heart broke the very first time I walked into prison. And the majority of the faces that I saw, if not all of them, looked like me. And I'm talking about 19-year-old kids, 20-year-old kids, and we're having conversations. And a 19-year-old kid tells me he's got 30 years for a nonviolent drug conviction. And I'm not condoning illegal activity or criminal behavior. I'm not condoning it at all. But a nonviolent drug offense for a 19-year-old kid, and he's got 30 years, 40 years, like it's saddening. It's very saddening. And when you understand there's an actual system that is seemingly designed to keep this going, it's just heartbreaking. So when I saw you transition, it was something that I've been like, you know what? I really have a lot of respect for that. I have a lot of respect for it. And your honesty, just saying, hey, this is who I was and this is who I am. And, this is what I'm trying to do. It's greatly appreciated. And we need more people to, like yourself, to get up and speak and talk and, not just love us when we're doing great things on a basketball court or, we have some exciting entertaining to do, but care about our lives outside of the entertainment aspect. And, I definitely appreciate it for sure. So
I appreciate being appreciated. And I promise you that, I'm a quarter century into this fight and I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm doing whatever I can to, it sounds like a bad word, but in this case, it's not. I'm trying to radicalize as many younger white people as I can.
Yeah.
I want them to be as angry about this as I am, because I don't think I'm going to live to see us make it to the top of Justice Mountain.
Yeah.
I wish that I were, but I don't think that I am based on a cold analysis of the data as I see it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to piss off young white people, so that they, hopefully there's an exponential effect where, the more young white people I got just the other day, it was just wonderful. I did an interview for a different thing, and at the end of it, it was a white couple, and their niece was in town. She was maybe 16, 17. And she had issue with some of the things I'd said, where it was the first time I've been called out for being a racial moderate, as King said, by a white person since like 1988.
Wow.
And it just made me feel hopeful, because it's like I didn't get defensive and be like, I've been in this fight longer than you've been alive. No.
Right.
I just was like listening to her and just smiling, but not like in a condescending way. And I'm like, this makes me really happy to know that here's a 16-year-old white girl who sounds more radicalized on the topic than I am.
Yeah.
And it was just wonderful to see, because that's what it's going to take. I mean, the MLK understood that well. He did a wonderful job of not just persuading white moderates, but of radicalizing white allies.
Yeah.
Because he knew just the other day, two white friends of mine were at the first night of protests in Atlanta, and they shut down 75-85. Okay. And like, white people think that, like, if they go to a protest when there's lots of unrest, they're going to get beat up or something like that. And that isn't true. Like, especially if you go during the heat of the protest, black people are like, all right, this motherfucker here he's really with us.
He's with us. Yeah.
Not just and so as cars are honking and getting belligerent and people are getting out of their cars, and of course, it's in the South, a lot of those cars are going to have guns.
Yeah.
And so the organizers of the shutdown of 75-85 started saying, white bodies to the front, white bodies to the front, because they knew that a pissed off racist white guy would think twice before putting a bullet into the skull of a white person.
Yeah.
And so I'm supposed to interview them this week. But anyway, we need we need we need allies to become radicals and moderates to
Yeah,
become allies.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I hope that these they haven't been very successful in terms of views yet.
Yeah,
But if they ever do become successful, or if someone else who's more prominent picks up the Not Isolated project and runs with it, that's totally fine by me.
yeah, it's cool.
But it's important that white people make the connection between the culture that permits harassment with the officers who commit acts of violence.
Right.
The permission and the commission are related.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that these issues collectively are definitely, positively not isolated. They're
Right.
much closer to universal than they are to isolated.
Yeah.
And I feel like if white people can accept that broadly, that it's not isolated, then more people will jump off the fence onto the right side. So,
The problem that if I can say one more thing,
absolutely.
the Tamir Rice situation in Ohio, we're talking about a 12-year-old kid, who granted was playing with a BB gun outside. But if you're a trained professional and you feel like a 12-year-old black kid is a threat within the first, I think they said, what, 12 seconds of him being there or something like that, 20 something seconds. That is, we're talking about children. If we just get away from the skin for a minute, we just say, okay, it's a child. We're talking about children in some of these cases. What was there a video what was it this year sometime of a cop putting like a 6-year-old little girl in the back of your squad car? What, I mean, that's crazy. Children. So black children are looked upon as like adults. They're treated like adults. But then we have videos of white individuals who, this guy was clearly insane. He's naked. He just killed somebody. He's resisting police. He's running around, and y'all don't even want to hit him with a taser. I mean, it's unbelievable to think sometimes that these worlds exist and it's right before people, and they just look at it and say, that's isolated. No, that is a problem with that badge, with that blue. And I support police. I want safe neighborhoods, and I want officers to go home to their families the same way I go home to mine. But you take the skin away, and we look at 12-year-old boys and 6-year-old little girls, and we had an incident. I don't know if it was 2 years ago here with the pool party. I think they were up in the northern part of DFW where that officer slammed that girl on the ground. I mean, with all of his force. I can't see how a grown man is afraid of a 12-year-old. I mean, there's not a 12-year-old on this earth, and my daughter's about to be 12, that I'm terrified of. And if I'm trained and I'm a professional, and I'm not going to be afraid of a 12-year-old kid. I'm sorry, I'm not. Nobody's here. We don't live in an environment or culture where 12-year-old kids are soldiers and they're carrying around rocket launchers and AK-47s. Like that is not. It's as bad as Chicago is and other places with violence and the youth that are out of control. We don't live in a place like that. Like I just don't get it. Well, I do get it, but it's something that really needs to be looked at, honestly.
Well, and so you mentioned a couple of anecdotal. It was truly. It wasn't. It wasn't just. It was horrifying to watch the cop slam the black girl to the concrete in McKinney.
Yeah.
It was equally or more horrifying to listen to so many white people say, "Well, she was disrespecting the police." Are you out of your fucking racist mind?
Right.
You can't slam a lippy 12-year-old girl to the concrete.
Right.
Like what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah.
How could you possibly justify that? And then I just want to point out as well, last thing, because anecdotal evidence is problematic. And because, like, for example, I can point to the video of a white teenage girl who was in police custody, and she either spit on the cop or kicked him in the shin. and he slammed the fuck out of her into the tile. Now, white people weren't rushing to defend the cop in that instance.
Right.
But to look at the data, any white people that are watching, there is zero statistical evidence to support the notion that there's not a widespread problem. Black people get sentenced longer for the same crimes. Black people get arrested more often for the same crimes. Speaking of, the people always cite the crime stats. Well, we really have arrest stats.
Yeah, we're over policed.
And so if they do a sweep through a government housing unit by Fair Park and arrest 30 black teenagers for smoking weed, while not doing a sweep through SMU and arresting 30 white college kids for smoking weed, did the college kids not commit a crime?
Exactly.
And so it's really important for people to understand, because white people like to cling to selective data. Right? 600%, black people are 600% more likely to commit homicide than white people, proportionally. I say, okay. And they're also 44% more likely to serve in the armed forces, to serve their country patriotically. But I've never heard you make that fucking point.
Yeah.
Right? You're grabbing at only the stats that paint the negative picture. And virtually all of those stats are easily explainable when you factor in things such as, one, a lot of the race-based disparities disappear when you control for poverty. Right? The poor white people on Jerry Springer from a trailer park in Muskogee, right? They got a lot of the same problems there. Right? Drug addiction, out-of-wedlock birth rate, and so on and so forth. So America made y'all poor on purpose, and we kept y'all poor on purpose. And so a lot of the negative stats we see are related to that y'all are disproportionately poor by design. And so it's really not a black thing. It's a economics thing.
Yeah.
But if you're going to cite stats about black people, and you're not controlling for economics, you're not controlling for population density, you're not controlling for over policing, you're being a propagandist, is what you are. So any white folks out there, that the next time if you're watching this, the next time you say 600%, I want to fucking hear you say 44% too.
Right. Yeah.
At least start telling a more fair, accurate picture instead of selectively citing data to make black people look as bad as you possibly can. Because it's like, why would you try to make black people look bad unless you were a racist? There's no other reason I can think of.
Bingo.
So, anyway, Charles Campbell, my friend, you gave me a lot to think about, and I feel horrible that you had a pistol in your face driving home sober before the curfew, and white people are going to say, I had a gun in my face too. Yeah, because you tried to punch the cop.
Right.
Shit-faced. Again, nobody's saying that that a black person who's speeding shouldn't be pulled over and given a ticket. But they don't need to have a light shine in their face and be treated with verbal disrespect and be asked all sorts of questions that I get asked some of those questions sometimes. If I haven't washed my car in a long time, there's a bunch of trash in it, and I haven't shaved in a long time, and my hair's too long, I'll get asked those questions. But if I got a fresh haircut and my beard's trimmed and my car's clean, they never ask me where I'm going. Right. They never shine a light in the car. They never, and here you are as a clean-cut professional black man, and yet you're still getting the light and the where you're going and getting interrogated. It's like there's an automatic presumption that you must have done something.
Must have.
Beyond simply speeding. Yeah. And we as white people don't have those experiences based on race. And I want to be very clear. You could have dreads down to your ass and, a George Clinton beard, wearing a T-shirt with weed on it, like a picture of the marijuana leaf.
Yeah.
Mismatching slides in a crappy car. And that doesn't matter. Like the whether or not you're clean cut, it doesn't matter. If the cops are fucking with a person who hasn't committed any type of crime, the cops are completely out of bounds constitutionally, and morally. I only reference the clean cut thing because you hear that so much from white people.
Yeah.
Well, he was wearing a do-rag. Oh, he was doing this. And it's like they always try to look for an excuse to validate the cops' unconstitutional behavior.
Yep.
And so the reason why I referenced clean cut was just to point out to white people, you can be as clean cut as you want to be. You're still black.
And I'm short. I'm not a big guy, man. I'm a small guy. Like, I don't come off as just this intimidating figure. You know what I mean?
Well,
and I have crazy stories.
And we keep saying last thing, but I may do a longer form podcast here, just because a lot of these conversations don't organically want to end inside of a reasonable time frame for
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that white people pay attention to the stats. You know, they don't just dismiss anecdote, don't reflexively disbelieve. And you know, you referenced your height, and it's like, it's incredible to me if you read the stories of like a 5'10" black actual criminal was described as a white shop owner as 6'4".
Yeah.
It's like the weirdest thing that like, it's hard to wrap my brain around the psychology that results in a lot of white supremacists attaching weird superpowers to black people. It's like, how can you think that you're superior and also that but it just goes to show, right? White supremacy and racism are not rational things.
Not at all.
You know, so Charles Campbell, my friend, I appreciate your time very much. And this will go up in 2 days.
Okay.
And let's keep the dialogue open. And
yeah,
I'm really glad you decided to share. And hopefully we talk sometime soon.
Absolutely. And I need to get down to Mexico City when all this stuff clears up. I'm
dead ass. 99% of the people who say, come on down, stay with me, they're full of shit. Yeah. And 99% of the people who say, I'm going to come see you, are full of shit.
Oh, I'm all for it.
So I'm letting you know that I'm in the 1%.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
Are you also in the 1%?
Hey, I am in the 1%. If we get this COVID situation, hey, I'm in Mexico City for sure.
Bring your ass on down here. You'll love it. It's an unbelievable city. So
absolutely.
And the COVID thing's not going to be with us for, that's a whole nother ball of wax. So, Charles Campbell, thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you, Pete.
Okay, cheers, brother.